Hello everyone and welcome to another video. So, a little while back, at the start of the winter, I made a video talking about wild carrot plants. That while they may not necessarily be in season for the tuber portion, you can still get nutrition from the seeds, and occasionally you will find a wild carrot that has germinated at the wrong time and is valid as a tuber. I cautioned against eating them in that way unless you had no other choice, because struggling plants tend to be harder to identify and can potentially have toxic compounds within them. At the time, I said they had germinated at the wrong time, and they did, and I said that their chances of survival were very slim. They had made a fatal mistake. They didn't germinate in the early spring, which is when they are supposed to, and they would likely die as a result. And, well, they didn't. Some of them did, but others have seemed not to really care that it is the middle of the winter. Now, this isn't even counting the ones that are potentially newer growth or have been sheltered, like this one has over here, by plant matter that may insulate them and prevent them from getting frozen. I'm talking about this one and this one right here that are completely out in the open and have been hit by ice storms, several inches of snow, and been under the snow for days at a time. It's really only a little bit above freezing outside right now, and the nights get below freezing pretty much consistently. And I've been looking at these two for quite a while now, and I'm almost certain they show up in my video that I took in the beginning of the winter. I took a look at the footage and was like, yeah, this is the exact same spot. These are the exact same plants. They seem not to really care that it's not the right time for them to be growing, and they're still growing. As you can see, this one's even got green bits. It is sort of struggling. I mean, it has to be expected that it is not doing perfectly well, as it's the complete wrong time for this to be growing. But, you know, it's still photosynthesizing. It has green parts. And this one in particular right here doesn't look as sprawling, but last time I looked at it, it was. In fact, it was way greener than this one right here. And if you look closely, you'll see that this plant was eaten up by an herbivore. It was doing so well that some rabbit or deer came along and used it as a snack. Now, since this is a tuber plant, and you can see the new growths sprouting about, I do think this one will still survive. That's not to say that other plants aren't growing. Of course, there's these wild field garlic plants, but in their case, this is part of their normal life cycle. They germinate in the fall and survive the winter, so they're specially adapted to do this. So it doesn't surprise me that they're succeeding at it, but nothing special. And of course, there are other plants that seem not to care that it's winter. Most surprisingly, these wild strawberry plants. They just seem to flat out not care that it's winter. They're perfectly green, and they don't seem to show any signs of really struggling that much. Now, as much as I want to give these plants credit for surviving where others didn't, some of the wild carrot plants I had in the other video just flat out aren't here anymore. They didn't survive. However, upon thinking about it, I think I know the direct mechanism and reason why these were even able to survive. Okay, so first reason, a lot of the plants that have survived are wild edibles. Wild edibles are typically very tenacious plants. And in the case of this wild carrot and the wild strawberry, they store quite a bit of energy underground in their root systems. So if this plant doesn't see the sun for a week because it's been snowed over, that's not too much of an issue. It can just call on its energy reserves and then once the snow recedes, it will be able to again start photosynthesizing as it is now and regain the energy that it needed to use up in its roots. In addition, I actually don't really think it matters, especially considering what happened over the course of the winter. I don't think it matters what weather these plants actually get hit by. What matters is the temperature. Most plants that are wild, that is to say either native or introduced in this area, tend to be at least somewhat frost resistant. Otherwise, they would have a lot of trouble surviving in the early spring when they need to germinate. If they germinate in the late spring, well, they're going to get outcompeted by other plants. If they germinate in the early spring, which is a period of time where the chance of low temperatures and frost is likely, then they might just flat out die. So, all wild plants really do need to have some ability to resist frost. Now, keep in mind my conclusion is speculative, and I might be wrong, but I think this is what happened. As long as it doesn't get below a certain temperature threshold, say, for example, 0 degrees Fahrenheit. I don't actually know if that's the threshold, but might be different for different species of plants, so that's just an example. If it doesn't get below a certain threshold, then these plants won't freeze. Their cell walls, at least the ones that matter, the ones in the roots, does look like some of the leaves did have issues where their cell walls froze and were destroyed. But as long as the central tuber doesn't freeze and die, then the plant will be able to survive. Additional potential causes are perhaps it's just evolution, perhaps these specific wild carrot plants just were better suited to handling lower temperatures and more heavy frost, snow, and ice. And potentially the gravel in which they are growing may help them survive in some way. I don't exactly know how, but it is possible that the gravel is participating in helping them survive. As for the relevance of this, well, potentially any plant that can last through the winter and grow through the winter will likely grow larger in the spring and thus be a more valuable food source. And they will also most definitely be resistant to frost that could harm them in the early spring if you were to plant seeds from this plant in the early spring if you were cultivating them. And potentially, as these wild carrots are the same species as cultivated carrots, perhaps the frost resistance traits could be crossbred into cultivated carrots to give them better frost resistance. Overall, I'm quite happy to be wrong in this case when I said that these guys weren't going to survive the winter. Potentially, this is a result of climate change as well, but just goes to show how tenacious plants can be. Hope you all enjoyed. See you next time.